Okay, it's 6 o'clock and I will call to order the regular board meeting for Plainfield Charter Township for June 27th, 2022. Our first order of business is invocation and pledge of allegiance, which I will lead. Heavenly Father, we come to you asking for your blessing and help as we gather together. We pray for guidance in the matters at hand and ask that you would clearly show us how to conduct our work with a spirit of joy and enthusiasm. Give us the desire to find a way to excel in our work. Help us to work together for the betterment of the community. Keep our fellow board member Frank and his family close to you in their time of need. Amen. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda is public comments. Don't see a whole lot of public, so I guess we'll move right on to the review of the consent agenda. So if there's any questions, comments, concerns from the board, otherwise I would seek a motion for the approval of the agenda, including the consent agenda and accounts payable.
I move to approve the agenda, including the consent agenda and the accounts payable.
Thank you, Jack. Support?
I'll support that.
Thank you, Bill. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hagedorn.
Yes.
Mrs. Morrow. Yes. Mr. Brinkman.
Yes.
Ms. Beatty.
Yes.
Ms. Postma, yes. Mr. Coleman.
Yes. Okay, next item is a presentation from Friedeveld Hafner. Cameron?
All right, this is time for our annual audit presentation. So you've received your packets, and so tonight with us we have our finance director, Warren Smith, and he's going to introduce our auditor and talk about our finances from the last fiscal year. Take it away, Warren.
Good evening. I'm Warren Smith, Finance Director, as you all know. So we had a very good year from a financial standpoint for the township. General fund was very good, but we also had a good year in many of the other funds as well. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out. General fund balance increased by almost $1.5 million, which was pretty substantial. That was almost $1 million more than what we had in the budget. And there's many different reasons for this. Some of it has to do with unexpected revenues that came in. There's some of the examples are almost $300,000 more in tax revenues. Almost $200,000 in additional grant revenues, and $466,000 in state shared revenue. Now the state shared revenue, big portion of that was to catch us up for the 2020 census, because we had been being paid at the previous census count from 10 years prior. So because of our population increase, we got a bigger share of the funding. In addition to the general fund, sewer fund had a net gain of $632,000. That's pretty typical for sewer fund, and we like to be able to have that kind of thing happen so that we can build up funds for future projects that maybe we can do without having to bond for. Water fund had a very good year, net increase of over $10 million. There was several different reasons for this. A lot of it had to do with it was being a pretty hot, dry summer. We saw quite an increase in our water sales. However, a lot of it had to do with the whole Wolverine projects with some state grants for also extending water main out to certain areas that weren't covered under the Wolverine agreement. And the last one I was going to talk about was the building fund. We had a pretty good year with the building fund as well. Now, we're going to see quite a difference in the future on building fund numbers because of the changes that we made in the whole structure of that department, with Cascade Township handling a lot of it. So we won't see near the revenue numbers, but we won't see near the expenditure numbers either. So, and that seems to be working out very well for us. So those are just a few things that I pointed out, and most of those things are explained in the memo I sent to you. And at this point, I'm going to let Doug Vredeveld take over for me, and he is our chief auditor for Vredeveld Hefner.
Thank you very much for having me. First, this is the, once again, an annual comprehensive financial report, so it's a little bit more expanded than a typical financial statement, as it includes an introductory section and a statistical section. It is also submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association for an annual award. The award was received for the 2020 financial statements and is included in here, and we anticipate that this report will qualify as well. It gets submitted and then it's kind of a year behind on the cycle, but congratulations on that. It's not every community gets that, so it's a bit of a prestigious award that you can qualify for. And then just by way of my report, I'll try not to repeat anything Warren said. When we do the audit, we provide an opinion on the financial statements, and that opinion is a good, clean opinion this year. It's found on page 1 of your audit report, or of the booklet here. It's a good, clean opinion. We didn't have any material weaknesses or deficiencies to report, so, and all the numbers we tested were clean and good, so it's a good report, certainly what you hope to get when you have an audit done. Page 5 through 15 of the report are your management discussion and analysis. Big things that happened this year that Warren didn't mention. You issued $7.5 million worth of new debt in your water and sewer funds, which is used for those projects in those funds. And your unassigned fund balance in the general fund, which Warren did mention was up quite a bit, is at about 54% of your unassigned fund, or of your annual expenses. So I'll go, you'll see some of that on the slides as I go through them. And just one footnote I wanted to point out to you on page 36, right at the top of the page. This is where we have to report to the state any over expenditures of your appropriations or your budgets. And there's 3 small minor ones there. None of them are over the threshold where the state has requested any further documentation on those. So they're minor, but they're still reported in here as we are required to do. So not a huge deal, but they are reported. And then by way of the slides here, I'll kind of walk you through some different pages as I go through the slides, and we'll see how this works. So I got a big desk, so I can do this. The first couple slides here are found on pages 17 through 19. This is the government-wide financial statements, so it encompasses all of the activities of the township on a full accrual basis within 3 functions, and that's your governmental activities, your business type activities, and your component units. So just the governmental activities column, you can see right at the bottom of page 17, it's up about 1.9 million from the last year. And again, this is on full accrual basis, so it includes all of your debt, all of your capital assets, and everything else. And this slide here, this little pie chart, kind of gives you a picture of where the revenue and the governmental activities comes from. It's about 50% coming from property tax, and about 27% from state shared taxes, and 17% from other charges. And this next one, this is also governmental activities. This is kind of a picture of your various expense areas by function, so general government, public safety, and so forth, compared to the program or direct revenues that are associated with each of the expense functions. And for example, in public safety there, the program revenues consist of your building department revenue. So you can see that makes up a portion of the expenses, certainly not all of it. And what this slide really shows you is the revenue we just looked at, which is the non-program revenues of state shared revenue and property taxes. These are the gaps that fills. So it covers a bunch of the general government, it covers a bunch of public safety and public works and so forth. So just kind of a picture of what you're using the general revenues for. And then this is the net assets of your governmental activities. You can see the amount invested in capital has continued to increase. That means that your purchases or your new capital is outpacing the depreciation, so that's good. That means you're investing new. Unrestricted took a pretty good jump there, and then restricted is basically about the same as it was in previous years. So, and then the next several slides here, we'll just concentrate on your general fund, which Warren already mentioned a little bit. Right at the bottom, this covers pages 20 through 24-ish. Right at the bottom of page 20, in the left-hand column, that's your general fund, and right near the bottom is 4.9 million in unassigned fund balance. That's 54% reflects the unassigned fund balance divided into your annual expenditures, which is the number I mentioned before. So your fund balance is or unassigned or available fund balance is at 4.9 million in the general fund. And one other thing, this is a little bit of repeat information, but on page 47 is your general fund budget to actual. And Warren kind of went over some of the reasons for this already, but on the bottom of page 47, you can see your final amended budget was to have an increase of 542,000. Your actual increase was about 1.4 million, so about $1 million ahead of budget. And Warren mentioned the additional or unexpected revenues. There was also some capital items that were delayed in the fire department and some road construction that was budgeted that didn't occur quite yet at the end of the year. And then general administration was well under budget as well. And there was no one item, but a whole bunch of different miscellaneous items that made up that difference. So just to point those out. Then this slide here is general fund revenues, kind of the same picture as government-wide almost, but the taxes you can see have just been steadily increasing over the last 5 years. And you can see the state shared revenue took a jump this year for 2021 because of that census adjustment. And then other is kind of the catch-all for everything else, and that's down just a little bit. That one can fluctuate any which way. And then your expenditures by function. The only one I was going to point out here was the recreation and culture. You can see that jumped up a little bit from previous years. And the biggest fluctuations in here are capital projects. So recreation and culture, this year there was a big trail project that was worked on. Yes, the trail work that was done there, that caused a little bit of a blip in the expenses there. And then here's your general fund balance that I mentioned. You can see it's gone up the last couple years and up to 54% of annual expenditures and transfers. And then this is the water and sewer fund. Warren was mentioning the total or the bottom line. This is the operating income and expense, only the operating. So this, the sewer fund has operating income this year, which is very good. That means you're covering your depreciation. The other thing that we look at is the cash position in the funds. And I didn't mention this is page 25 where this information is. The cash position in the fund is very good. It's at about 7 million. So it's the net income each year after year is accumulating there, and that's great. And then the water fund, you can see on an operating standpoint, it took a loss this year. However, there's a lot of cash in the water fund, primarily due to that settlement, the settlement project that Warren mentioned earlier. So still in good shape. And in spite of an operating loss, that just means you're not quite covering about 2.5 million of annual depreciation in that fund. So depreciation's a non-cash item, so it doesn't mean necessarily the fund's in bad shape, but just something to be aware of and keep your eye on. And then this is the your business type activities, which encompasses both the water and sewer fund together. And you can see invested in capital assets here as well as continuing to go up, which means in spite of all the depreciation you recognize each year, you're still outpacing depreciation with new infrastructure purchases, which is good. And the unrestricted took a jump this year, which we expect that will go down as the settlement money is used up. I think that was my last slide. There we go. The other item to mention is there was also a 2-page letter issued with the report. This is mostly canned information about the audit and how it went. There were no difficulties, for example. We find very few adjusting entries. Warren does a great job in having everything ready for us. The one thing we did want to mention here is on the second page, and that's regarding the PEG channel fees. This is included as a liability on your financial statements, and it's just continuing to grow and grow and grow for the last several years. So just a suggestion to keep an eye on that money and see if there's anything that PEG channel, the channel fee money can be used for, or talk to the cable company and see about getting rid of it. So that concludes my report. Is there any questions I can address or answer for you, or did I miss a page or two that you'd like to talk about?
Jack?
I have a question for Warren, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
Sure.
I'd rather have it be for him.
Given the budget as a negative 988,000 for this year, and also given the fact that we had an increase in tax revenues and state shared revenue for last year, do you anticipate that in 2022 that 988,000 budget deficit will be considerably less?
We do generally budget rather conservatively, both on the revenue side and expenditure side. So generally, our operating results are much better than how we may budget. So most likely, yes, we're gonna see it much more favorable than what we might have in the budget at this point.
Because you really were not aware of how 2021 was going to turn out when you fashioned the 2022 budget. So it would seem likely that we would look a lot better.
Correct, yes. And because we were kind of still in the whole COVID timeframe and we didn't know how a lot of that was going to impact us, we even were a little bit more conservative than what we normally are.
Good, thank you.
Susan, anything? Okay. Kathleen?
All set.
Kathy?
Just a confirmation, ARPA funds won't be used until 22 and 23, correct? So there would be none on this report for ARPA funds?
We don't, right now, we're kind of holding off on using the remaining ARPA funds. We haven't received all of it yet from the state. The state will distribute it for the federal government. And we're actually expecting that could be within next couple of weeks where we will receive the other half of those funds, which will be about 1.7 million. We initially used some of the funds to cover some of our COVID expenditures, some reduction in revenues. However, the rest of it, we're planning on holding and hopefully doing some kind of joint project with the county and making better use of the funds, maybe some kind of match with them, so make the dollars go further. And we don't know when that's going to happen yet. I can't see that happening this year at all. So probably 2023, maybe 2024.
Okay, Bill?
No, I talked to you the other day about this, Warren. I didn't think I had to use my voice thing, but I do, I guess. I put this question to Peter. We know that we're in galloping inflation right now. And it's going to go up to a point, and then it's going to go into a power dive. In government here, what can we look forward to, how can we deal with that? Do you got any ideas on that?
I think your conservative budgeting is probably the best thing you can really do to watch for that. And it's hard to say right now how that inflation is going to affect your state shared revenues. Your property taxes are probably going to be several years behind. You know, if there was any decrease in property taxes, that's going to run several years behind the current inflation, would be my guess. That's how it kind of happened the last time in 2008 that this happened. So how do you deal with it? Budget carefully.
I was a baby in 1930, so I don't remember too much about that, but I know that we had some hard times back in those days, so.
But I believe it was it 2008, the last time this really, tanked down a little bit, and then it was more like 2011 when the property taxes started to drop. So it was a couple years behind the other drop, and then it started to come back again. So that's as much history as I have.
All right. We shall see, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Warren, excellent job once again. Okay. Okay, new business. Our item for the evening is to provide a second reading and consider an ordinance to amend our stormwater management ordinance. Cameron?
Okay, Pete was going to join us tonight. Unfortunately, he was sick today, so I'm going to do my best to answer questions in his place. And if there's anything I can't answer, then we always have the option of tabling it if there's any major concerns. So my understanding of what we're trying to do here, it's more of a language cleanup. You may recall that last fall we implemented a big revision to our stormwater ordinance. And apparently, my understanding is when we did that, we went with the model ordinance that ELGRO works with all the ELGRO communities. But then when we did that, we missed part of our existing ordinance that we really wanted to keep. So there's some language in here that, to my understanding, was in our prior ordinance, and we're looking to reinstate that language into our new ordinance. So really it comes down to when new development's happening, making sure that proper precautions are taking place in the development process to make sure there's not undue erosion and problems with the stormwater. So that's the crux of what we're trying to add here. So we've gone through a first reading and now we're second reading. So we're to the point where if the board's comfortable, we can adopt this change to the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Once again, I assume there's no public comment, but I'll open the floor for that if there is any. And not seeing any, we'll just close the floor for that. So, board comments, if there's any. Jack?
I'm very comfortable, actually.
Thank you. Susan?
So am I.
All right. Kathleen? Kathy? Bill?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, very good. So I would seek a motion at this time.
I move to approve the ordinance to amend the stormwater management ordinance as presented.
Thank you, Susan. Support?
Second.
Jack, so roll call vote, please.
Okay, Ms. Beatty?
Yes.
Mrs. Merrill?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman?
Yes.
Mr. Hagedorn?
Yes.
Ms. Postma, yes. Mr. Coleman?
Yes. All right, you're back on the microphone, Cameron, for
right.
your comments.
All right, well, we had a nice financial report this year. It was a couple of years of unknowns. I remember sitting in April 2020 in a shutdown period where there's predictions of doom and destruction economically, and forecasts of state shared revenue dropping as much as 40%. And I was starting to do the math and figure out that we're talking about in excess of $1 million to our general fund. And how am I going to, fix that hole. And then it turns out to be quite different, and then there's supplemental federal dollars. So it's been a very odd and unusual last 2 years in terms of budgeting, in terms of financial management. We're on the right side of that. I'd like to stay on the right side of that. I'm sure you would too.
Yes, definitely.
We've got our fund balance in a healthy place, but that also means we have the opportunity to use it in certain ways. So one thing that we do want to keep in mind, a lot of this money was one-time money. Even some of the adjustments to state shared revenue, we saw that bump, and it was a catch-up bump last year. So the state shared revenue is based on population, and the census was delayed. So there was money that we were owed in the prior year based on the formula that the state couldn't calculate that number until they had the census numbers. And so that was delayed, so there was a catch-up amount that we received last year. A nice bump for our general fund, but not something that we can plan on again and again. That was a one-time allocation to catch us up. The new formula goes forward with our new population, but that won't be as much as we received last year. So that helps us understand, okay, this is one-time funds. We can't plan on those from an operating perspective, that we will be getting that much every year, but it does help us with some of those one-time costs that we want to look at as well. So as we talked about before, we want to figure out carefully how we want to invest this in the community, what's going to be long-reaching, and what's going to be something that's going to help community without creating a future cost obligation. It's great to build things and invest that money, but you want to make sure you're not just putting a burden on the future generations of the township that now they're obligated to maintain whatever we've spent the money on. So something that we'll talk about as we get into the budget season here. Warren's already starting to, he's left. He's got to get back and start his budget now. The audit's done, budget time. So we're starting to collect the budget numbers, typical process. Staff is starting to put numbers together now through July, and then in August, we'll sit down for the first time and in a workshop and talk about preliminary numbers for 2023. So we'll start that process and start to talk about how we want to put our priorities forward. A few other things going on. We have received a letter from some of the residents and parcel owners along Cuts Hill for exploring a drain, and we've talked about this a little bit. There's some drainage issues along Cuts Hill, and it really starts from about Plainfield CRC and down to the south. The residents that are adjacent there, they're seeing some, especially this spring, saw some flooding issues that need to be addressed. And so what they're asking, the challenge is the process that the county has to go through for to create a drain. They really can't take into consideration what it will cost. They have to investigate whether it is necessary from a water perspective, not a financial perspective. And obviously the property owners want to know what might this cost them. So there is a way to get around that, and that involves the township helping out with a preliminary study. And so that's what's been asked of us, to do a first step, a preliminary study. This is something that we've done before. We would engage a firm like Prine & Newhoff to take a quick look at what are the options and what might they cost. And with that, then we can go back to the residents and say, okay, here's some of the options that the drain commissioner might explore and what some of the ballpark costs are for those projects. Do you want to petition for a drain? And that helps them understand what embrace for, how many thousands of dollars this project might be, and if that's really worth it to them as property owners. So if I can get the quote together, I'll have it back for your next board meeting to consider, and we'll take a look at that option and see how to go forward with this.
Did we need to receive a letter of something asking us to do this?
I have received a letter, yes, from I think 5 or 6 different property owners have asked us to at least take this step.
Okay,
So,
great.
yep.
Thank you.
How many properties are affected approximately?
Off the top of my head, I think about 25 are directly affected, but if there's a drain district created, it'd be significantly more, because it would be the properties upstream. Yeah, that would be, just because you're not Just because you're high and dry doesn't mean you don't have to pay the bill, right? It's your water that's going into someone else's yard. So the whole drain district would have to be assessed for that. So we'll have to explore how much that is and divide it out by how many parcels are included to get an estimate put together.
Has the new ravines at Inwood development affected that, that drain problem?
Short answer, yes, but it's more complicated than that. So, yes, the development at Ravines has certainly increased the amount of water that's going through to the south. But the more complicated answer is that's the way it was intended to be. And the problem is, over the years, even though the water was always intended to go that way, it wasn't. And so people put sheds and fences and other landscaping elements in their backyard, and now the water course is not as prepared to handle the water as it was before. And there is just generally more runoff. You get more impervious surface, you're gonna have more runoff. That's just the basic fact of it. So yes, the ravines is contributing more water. They have done everything the Drain Commission has asked them to do, and the Drain Commission's office has investigated and found everything to be working as requested. So from that perspective, it's not the fault of ravines, but it is the cause, if that makes sense. So, yeah. Any other questions on that one before I move on? Was that confusing?
No.
Okay,
No, I remember.
No, I understand.
okay.
Yeah, we saw a picture of it with all the backyards, so, yeah.
Yeah, it can be standing water at times when there's heavy rain. A couple other items, Versluis, where the word's out that the park is open and free, and we're getting the crowds. And it's a good thing, we're getting a lot of utilization of our parks, but there's increased trash for pickup. We had to order more trash cans. And it's not that people were not being courteous, there just wasn't space in the trash can. So we've had to order more. Apparently we have the dumpster dumped 3 times a week already. Yeah, so a lot of people at the park. So, and as you can imagine, when you get more people, you get more problems. So we're working with our law enforcement to make sure that everything is keeping the atmosphere that we're looking for at the park, so. Last item, don't forget, open burn permits expire at the end of this week, right, Chief? Okay, and the way we've set up our ordinance, no open burn permits are allowed in July, August, because those are typically hotter months, drier months, and more problem with a fire getting out of control and spreading. Recreational fires, fire pits, or contained fires, campfires are still allowed in the appropriate setting. So. And you do need to have a permit to do an open brush burn. So just if you have talk with residents or talk with neighbors, remind them of that. That's all I had.
Okay, thank you. Board member comments? Bill, do you have anything?
Everything's going great, really.
Okay, great. Kathy? Good, thank you. Kathleen?
I'm all set, thank
How
you.
about Susan?
The senior programs are rolling along. All of the classes are, we're getting not only filling once, but they're needing encore classes also. One class that is, one thing that's held every month, not in the summer, but 9 months of the year, is called Apprentice for Life, where there's a subject it doesn't relate to any other subjects, and it's a free lecture. There were 240 people in the Performing Arts Center at Northview High School when a man who works with Gordon Lightfoot came and told the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it was phenomenal. We actually, the first time some people saw this man's presentation was up at the Grand Hotel in Mackinac, and he was worth every bit of, it was a 90-minute program, and it was outstanding. Anyway, we're getting ready for a newsletter to go out, which that means going through the registration process, which is mind-boggling, but the senior program is up and running, doing well.
Good, thank you. Jack?
I read in the paper that Lowell is beginning a sprinkling ban. Is there going to be a problem potentially in Plainfield?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I read that too. we're nowhere close to needing a sprinkling ban at this point in terms of how much water is being consumed. I was surprised that Lowell got there that quickly, but their production is also probably 10% of ours, so they're probably much more susceptible to that. So yeah, it's something that our water staff is always watching, particularly this time of year. It's been dry the last couple of weeks, and so I know Don Petrovich is watching that closely, but we're not thinking that at this point, but we'll let you know as soon as there's any concerns.
Okay, and the other thing is, we had planned every other meeting to be kind of a work session, and we were going to look at spending money. Well, now that's put on the table, so we're not going to be looking at that because of the county. So do you have any ideas in terms of what the next board meeting is going to look like?
Yeah, so Governance Committee talked about moving to doing this format for the first meeting of the month, so that we'll meet like this again for our next meeting, because we'll flip what we did this, in June was a little odd. We did the workshop, the first meeting. So we'll do a regular meeting, and then we'll do a workshop. Our July workshop, we're gonna talk about our senior program, and I know there's been some questions raised about that. So we're gonna talk through that. I think that's a big enough discussion that will probably consume a lot of our time. But my thought for these workshops, it's a good chance for us to talk through ideas without being in such a format that you feel like a decision must be made at that time. And so we'll take advantage of that. I'm targeting the August workshop to start talking about budget. And that fits naturally because that's typically when we hold a separate workshop to talk about budget. So we'll slide that into the August meeting. I think August, October, and then we'll see maybe even September talk about spending priorities.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to tell the board members that we still have some money in the board sunshine fund, and in light of Frank Pfaff's passing of his father-in-law, we'll just wait and see what they ask for as far as memorials, and then we have enough money to handle it now. And that's money that comes from the board.
Okay, thank you. I really don't have much to add. It's been a pretty quiet couple weeks, so. At this point, we're to our closed session item on the agenda, so I would seek a motion at this time to go into our closed meeting.
I move to enter into closed session to consider the purchase of real property as permitted by MCL 15.268 Parents D, which is part of the Open Meeting Act.
Thank you, Kathleen. Support?
I'll support that.
Thank you, Bill. Roll call vote.
Ms. Beatty?
Yes.
Mr. Hagedorn?
Yes?
Mrs. Morrow?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman?
Yes.
Ms. Postma, yes. Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
And just to be clear, we're not anticipating any action after this closed session. So this will be the continuation of board action for tonight, if that makes sense.